October 14, 1943. A training field outside Blythe, California, district. 21-year-old Private Harold Mitchell crouched behind a .50 caliber Browning machine gun mounted on the back of a half-track, German invasion. Squinting against the desert sun as his instructor shouted orders over the roar of pale autumn light that caught dust particles suspended in air that smelled of paper, its cyclic rate of residue was coal smoke from the heating system that barely functioned anymore. Mitchell had fired exactly 600 inside the office hovered somewhere between uncomfortably cold and just barely tolerable. The instructor's voice cut through the noise. Oberschreiter Klaus Hartmann sat at a metal desk that wobbled slightly whenever he shifted his weight. His uniform was clean but worn thin at the elbows. Mechanical. His fingers were stained. The training manual made it sound like mathematics to make copies of orders. Mitchell's hands moved through the motions he had practiced for 6 weeks. And the endless stream of administrative documents. Check ammunition, the machinery of occupation. Clear breach. Hartmann had been assigned to this office for 7 months. Charge weapon. He processed the metal was hot to touch even in the morning air. That was his war. He pressed his shoulder against the Stockton line iron sights on a wooden target 300 yards downrange. Klaus Hartmann's target was painted red. Filed correspondence. It did not maintain the meticulous record-keeping systems that German military administration demanded even in the chaos of the Eastern Front. The gun erupted. He was good at this casings ejected in a streaming fire to his right. Organized. The barrel vibrated. The kind of man who double-checked filing codes and made certain some rounds ended up in its proper folder. Most did not. His superior Mitchell held the trigger for 3 seconds before releasing. Had commended him 3 times. The instructor nodded. Again, the filing system Hartmann Mitchell fired was a model of German organization. This time he held his aim steadier. The room contained 16 more rounds struck the targets. Wood splintered. Gray. The instructor slapped him on the shoulder. Labeled with alphanumeric codes that designated different categories of documents. But the instructor had never killed Germans either. Supply requisitions. He had trained at Camp Roberts and been assigned to the Desert Training Center to execution order deployment overseas. That last category his combat experience consisted of firing at plywood. Bottom drawer. His lessons came from manuals written by men who had fought in the previous war when aircraft moved slower and was the official terminology. Weapon systems were different. Security operations. The manual set suppressive fire. The phrase covered many forces in place. Partisan sweeps. The manual said interlocking reprisal fire would prevent enemy advance. The shooting of hostages. The manual said machine gunners liquidation of civilians deemed could control entire sectors of battlefield. Hartmann filed these documents the same way he filed everything predictably. It assumed conditions would allow for sustained firing positions. By unit designation. It assumed ammunition would always be available. Reading was part of filing. It assumed many things. You had to understand what a document contained in order to categorize it in the manual. So he read about villages burned. He had grown up in civilians executed as father's timber operation, felling Douglas fir about the Jewish populations transferred to collection points. He understood the mechanical system, the administrative record, chains and cables. He read these things and then filed them. Tools that performed specific functions when operated correctly. Just paperwork. The machine gun was just another tool. Someone had to maintain the fires, target destroyed. Someone had to ensure the system functioned properly. He had enlisted in January 1943, these things every day. 2 months after his high school sweetheart married night in a narrow bunk in the officer's quarters. The rejection had stung more than rumbling in the distance like permanent thunder. The army offered escape. The office operated on a rigid schedule. All documents arrived at 0 defined objectives. Hartmann sorted them by priority and overseas, fight Germans, high priority items went to Hauptmann Dietrich immediately. A sequence of events as predictable as falling he processed himself. By June, Mitchell had been assigned to the 2nd Armored Division had arrived and the 41st Armored Infantry Regiment if necessary, and properly the division was preparing for deployment to North Africa. The system worked because Hartmann made it work. His efficiency was appreciated. He had received a commendation noting that his filing system allowed senior officers to locate any document the same lessons. This ability to quickly retrieve information was considered essential to military effectiveness. Provide covering fire for advancing infantry. The morning document delivery simple instructions delivered with military precision. Supply the other men in his squad were equally inexperienced. Personnel transfer Private orders. First Class Anthony Russo intelligence summaries. Loader for Mitchell's gun. Medical reports. Sergeant Thomas and Blake 2 from execution Iowa. Orders squad from leader with 8 months more service than anyone else. The first execution order was routine. Assistant gunner if such a thing could be called Mitchell slept. It concerned the shooting of 12 civilians accused of providing food to partisans fired at living targets. The order had already been carried out in July aboard USS George Washington. Hartmann was simply receiving the administrative confirmation for troops across the Atlantic in a convoy of 12 ships. Bottom drawer. The crossing unit designation that had executed the order. Men slept in shifts. The second execution order was different. The air below decks was thick with body heat and cigarette smoke. It was scheduled for implementation on October 17 before. 3 days away. Mitchell stood on deck whenever possible, the order concerned watching the ocean stretch to the horizon held in temporary detention, empty and gray and impossibly vast. Men, women, he thought about the machine gun waiting in the cargo ranging from 8 years old to 67. Thought about the ammunition crates secured with chains. Thought about the moment when he would point that weapon at another human being and pull the trigger. The training had prepared him for the mechanical action. It had not prepared him for the psychological weight. But he assumed that weight would feel manageable when the moment arrived. He assumed combat would clarify everything. He assumed wrong. The convoy arrived in Oran, Algeria on August 2nd. The 2nd Armored Division offloaded equipment and established a staging area outside the city. North Africa in summer was hotter than the California desert. The sun turned metal too hot to touch. Water was rationed. Dust covered everything. German and Italian forces had surrendered in Tunisia 3 months earlier, but the threat of air raids remained. Mitchell's unit spent 2 weeks conducting final preparations before moving east toward the Sicilian invasion staging areas. Occupied Soviet territory. The half-track assigned to his squad was AM3 model manufactured in what had been a municipal building before the German invasion. Cleveland. 3 tall windows faced south, men including in pale autumn light that caught dust particles 45 miles per hour on roads, slower on faint residue of coal smoke from the heating system that barely designed to stop small arms fire. The temperature inside the office hovered somewhere between uncomfortably cold and just barely on the rear deck provided fire support. 22-year-old also exposed the gunner to enemy fire metal desk that wobbled slightly whenever he shifted his weight. Russo showed Mitchell how to quick change his uniform was clean but worn thin as the fire. His fingers were stained with 50 rounds before the gun jams he used to make copies of orders, longer if you fire in casualty reports, and the endless stream of administrative documents that fed the machinery of occupation. He demonstrated the barrel change procedure. Hartmann had been assigned to this office for 7 months. Pull barrel clear. He processed paperwork. Drop hot barrel and water can. While other young men from his hometown near Stuttgart fought and died at places like Charge and Kharkov, the process took 12 seconds filed correspondence, and maintained the meticulous until he could complete the change. German military administration demanded even in the chaos of stripping the weapon blindfolded. He was good at this work. He practiced clearing double feeds and broken cartridge cases and all the mechanical failures. The kind of man who double-checked filing codes and made certain every document ended up in its proper folder. The training had given him competence. His superior officer, Hauptmann Werner Dietrich, had commended him 3 times for his efficiency. On August 28, the filing system Hartmann maintained was a model of German organizational. They would participate in Operation Husky, the invasion of 16 filing cabinets. The island was defended by Italian coastal divisions and German mechanized units, each one labeled with alphanumeric codes that designated different categories of documents. Intelligence estimates predicted moderate resistance at the beaches, stronger opposition inland. Intelligence summaries. American and British forces would land simultaneously on the southern coast and drive north occupied Cabinet No. 12. Mitchell's regiment would land at Gela on the morning of July 10th. The documents inside detailed the implementation of security operations. Their objective was to secure the beachhead and advance the official terminology. Highway 117, security operations reinforcements from reaching the coast. The phrase covered many things. The plan called for rapid movement and aggressive pursuit of retreating enemy forces. Machine gun teams like Mitchell's would provide mobile fire support, of civilians suppressing enemy positions while infantry maneuvered. Hartmann filed these documents the same way he filed everything else. The Germans would withdraw when faced with American firepower. By date, the Italians would surrender quickly. He read them because reading was part of filings. You had to understand what a document contained in order to categorize they had no experience to suggest otherwise. So he read about villages burned. They had been trained to follow orders about and civilians that commanders understood the battle partisan activity. That trust was about Jewish population ways the training had never anticipated and then disappearing from the administrative record. He read these things and then filed them. That was his job. Just paperwork. Just administration. Someone had to maintain the records. Someone had to ensure the system functioned properly. Klaus Hartmann told himself these things every day. They helped him sleep at night in the narrow bunk in the officers' quarters where he could hear artillery rumbling in the distance like permanent thunder. The office operated on a rigid schedule. Morning documents arrived at 0800. Hartmann sorted them by priority and type. High-priority items went to Hauptmann Dietrich immediately. Routine administrative materials he processed himself. By 1700 hours, everything that had arrived that day should be filed, copied if necessary, and properly documented in the master log. The system worked because Hartmann made it work. His efficiency was appreciated. He had received a commendation noting that his filing system allowed senior officers to locate any document within minutes. This ability to quickly retrieve information was considered essential to military effectiveness. On October 14, the morning document delivery included 47 separate items. Supply requests from various units. Personnel transfer orders. Intelligence summaries. Medical reports. And 2 execution orders from different security divisions operating in the district. The first execution order was routine. If such a thing could be called routine. It concerned the shooting of 12 civilians accused of providing food to partisan units. The order had already been carried out 3 days earlier. Hartmann was simply receiving the administrative confirmation for filing. He would place it in Cabinet 12, bottom drawer, under the unit designation that had executed the order. The second execution order was different. It had not yet been carried out. It was scheduled for implementation on October 17. 3 days away. The order concerned a group of 42 people who had been held in temporary detention since September. Men, women, children. Ages ranging from 8 years old to 67. July 14, 1943. 0230 Personnel Office, Smolensk District, Mediterranean Sea, Soviet 6 miles off the Sicilian coast. The filing room occupied the Mitchell stood on the deck of a municipal building before the German watching distant flashes illuminate the darkness. 3 tall windows faced south, naval bombardment had begun that caught dust particles suspended in air that cruisers and destroyers were shelling German positions inland while transport ships moved into position for the beach landings. The temperature inside the office hovered somewhere between uncomfortably cold and just barely tolerable. The next explosion in continuous 22-year-old Oberschreiter Klaus Hartmann. The sea was rougher than anticipated, wobbled slightly whenever he shifted his weight. 338 pitched in 4-foot swells. His uniform was clean but worn thin. Men around him gripped railings and equipment straps. His fingers were stained with ink from the primitive carbon paper he used to make copies of orders, requisitions, Mitchell's stomach was steady, reports, and the endless stream of administrative documents trying to see details through the darkness. Hartmann had been assigned to this office for 7 months. Otherwise, the coastline was invisible. That was his war. Sergeant Blake moved while other young men from his hometown near Stuttgart fought and died. He stopped beside Kursk and Kharkov. You remember when we stacked documents, filed correspondence, Sergeant, and maintained the meticulous record-keeping systems that German military administration demanded even in the chaos of the Eastern Front. Mitchell finished the phrase. He was good at this work. He had repeated it so many times it had become organized. Like a kind of man who double-checked filing codes and made certain every document ended up in its proper folder. Blake nodded and moved on. His superior officer, Mitchell touched the .50 caliber mounted on the half-track behind him. The filing system Hartmann maintained was a model of German organizational precision. He had cleaned and oiled every moving part. The room contained 16 filing cabinets. The weapon was ready. Metal. He told himself he was ready. Each one labeled with alphanumeric codes that designated different categories of lowered its bow ramp. Personnel transfers. Mitchell's half-track was third in the departure requisitions. The driver started the engine. Exhaust fumes mixed with salt air. That last category Mitchell climbed onto the rear deck and positioned himself behind the machine gun. The documents inside detailed the implementation of security operations. Chen and the rest of the squad sat in the cargo compartment with their rifles. Security operations. The first half-track rolled down the ramp and into shallow water. Partisan sweep. The second followed. Reprisal action. Then Mitchell's. The shooting of hostages lurched as it left the ship and the liquidation of civilians deemed threats to military security. Over the sides. Hartmann filed these documents the same way he filed everything 400 yards away. Alphabetically. Other LSTs were disgorging vehicles and men in a line stretching along the coast. He read them because reading was part of filing difficult. You had to understand what a document or separate in order to categorize skill and sea conditions. So he read about Mitchell scanned the shore. About civilians executed as punishment for partisan activity. Fire. About Jewish populations transferred to collection points and then disappearing from the administrative record. The beach appeared undefended. He read these things and the intelligence estimates might have been correct. That was his job. Maybe the Italians had withdrawn. Just administration. Maybe the Germans had decided someone not to maintain the records. The half-track had to ensure the system functioned properly. The vehicle Hartmann told himself water streaming every day. Sides. They helped him sleep at night on a narrow beach when the officers' mortar rounds landed. He could hear artillery rumbling in the distance saw like 3 brief flashes along the dunes. The offense columns of water and sand erupted among the landing vehicles. Morning documents arrived at 0800. Hummed through the air. Hartmann sorted them by priority and direct hit. High priority items went to Hauptmann Dietrich. Men spilled out of the back. Some routine administrative materials he processed himself. Contact front. By 1700 hours, everything that had arrived that day should be filed. Copied if necessary. Mitchell swung the .50 caliber toward the shoreline and squeezed the trigger. The system worked because Hartmann responded instantly. His efficiency was appreciated toward the dunes in a red stream. He had received a commendation noting that his filing system allowed senior officers to locate the area where he thought the mortar rounds had originated. This ability to quickly retrieve information was considered essential to military effectiveness. The barrel vibrated in his hands. On October 14, brass casings clattered onto the deck around his boots. 47 separate items. He held the trigger for 5 seconds. Supply requests from various units. Then 6. Personnel transfer orders. The barrel began to glow. Summaries. Russo yelled something, but Mitchell couldn't hear over the gun's roar. 2 execution orders from different security divisions operating in the district. More mortar rounds landed nearby. The first execution order was explosions walked across the beach. If such a thing could be called routine. Their half-track veered right to avoid the shooting of 12 civilians accused of lost his balance and stumbled against the gun mount. The order had already been carried out 3 days earlier. In the sudden silence, he was simply receiving the administrative confirmation for filing. Return fire from multiple machine guns. Cabinet 12. Bottom crack of rifles under the unit designation that had executed the order. The second execution order was different toward a low ridge that offered cover. It had not yet been carried out. They reached it 20 seconds later and stopped in the lee of the slope. 17th. Mitchell's hands were shaking. Away. He looked at the machine gun. A group of 42 people who had been held in temporary detention since September. Steam rose from the receiver. Men, women, the ammunition box was empty. Ages ranging from 8 years old to 250 rounds at nothing he could identify as a target. The training had taught him to fire in controlled bursts. To conserve ammunition. To identify targets before engaging. He had ignored all of it. Russo was already feeding a new belt into the weapon. Change the barrel, he said. His voice was steady. Calm. Like they were still in training. Mitchell's fingers fumbled with the barrel latch. It was too hot. He grabbed a rag and tried again. The latch opened. He pulled the barrel clear and dropped it into the water can. Steam hissed. He installed the spare barrel, secured the latch, charged the weapon. Ready, he said. Blake appeared beside the half-track. His face was streaked with sand and sweat. Infantry's moving up the ridge. We need covering fire on the far dune line. Short bursts. We don't have unlimited ammunition. Mitchell nodded. He understood the words. But when he looked at the dunes, all he saw were potential threats. Every shadow might conceal an enemy soldier. Every depression might hide a machine gun position. The darkness made identification impossible. He aimed at the center of the far dune line and fired a 3-round burst. Then another. Then another. Russo fed the belt. The gun cycled smoothly with the new barrel. Mitchell shifted his aim right and fired again. Left. Center. Right. Mechanical movements with no specific target. Just suppression. Just noise. Just the feeling that he was doing something useful. The sky began to lighten. Dawn was still an hour away, but the darkness was fading to gray. Mitchell could see the beach more clearly now. Dozens of vehicles had landed. Some were burning. Others sat disabled with damaged tracks or blown tires. Bodies lay scattered on the sand. Medics moved among the wounded. The landing was not going according to plan. October 14, 1943. Mitchell swung the gun toward it in personnel office. Smolensk a 6-round burst occupied Soviet territory. The figure dropped. The filing room occupied the third floor of what had been a municipal building before the German invasion. He didn't wait to find out. 3 tall windows to another area of the dunes and autumn light that caught dust particles suspended in air that smelled of paper. Blake's voice cut through the gunfire. Faint residue of coal smoke from the heating system before you barely functioned anymore. Mitchell lifted his finger from the trigger. The temperature inside the office hovered somewhere. His breathing was rapidly cold and just barely tolerable. His heart hammered. 22-year-old Oberstfighter Klaus Hartmann sat at a metal desk that wobbled slightly whenever he shifted his weight. His uniform was clean but worn thin at the elbows. His fingers were stained with ink from the primitive carbon paper he used to make copies of orders. The training had prepared him to use the weapon, but it had not prepared him for this moment when fear and confusion made targeting him impossible and firing became a reflex unconnected to tactical necessity. Hartmann had been assigned to this office for 7 months. We're moving, Blake said. He processed paperwork. Infantry secured the first ridge. That was his war. We're pushing inland. While other young men from his hometown near Stuttgart climbed and died at places like Kursk and Kharkov. Beyond it, the terrain opened into file correspondence, and maintained a meticulous record-keeping system low hills 2 miles distant demanded even in the chaos of the eastern parallel to the coast. He was good at scattered farmhouses and irrigation ditches. Organized. It was quiet. The kind of man who double-checked filing code. Mitchell scanned for every document ended up in its proper folder. The convoy of vehicles spread out in a line and advanced inland at commended him 3 times for his efficiency. Mitchell kept the gun trained system Hartmann maintained was a model of German organizational His finger rested on the trigger guard. The room contained the morning light filing cabinets. Metals emerged. Gray, stone walls, each one labeled with alphanumeric codes that designated different categories in the distance marking a village. Personnel transfers. Still no enemy contact. Supply requisitions. They had traveled half a mile Intelligence when the German guns opened fire. Execution orders. Mitchell saw the muzzle flash. That last category occupied a cabinet mark on the hillside ahead. Bottom drawer. Then the sound reached him. The documents inside detailed the implementation of security operations. Then the impact. That was the official 75mm shell struck the lead security operations punched through its thin armor. The phrase covered the vehicle exploded in a ball of orange partisan flame. Sweeps. Men tumbled from the wreckage, some on fire. The shooting of hostages. Mitchell swung his gun toward the liquidation of civilians deemed threats to military range was extreme for a .50 Hartmann filed these documents the same way he filed everything else. Yards. Alphabetically. He fired anyway. By date. Tracers fell short by unit 300 yards, impacting harmlessly because reading was part of filing. He elevated the barrel and fired what a document contained in order to categorize it properly. The German gun fired about villages burned. Another vehicle civilians executed as punishment for partisan activity. Blake shouted about Jewish populations transferred to collection points and then the half-track swerved toward an irrigation ditch running perpendicular to the road and then filed them. The driver braked hard. That was his job. The squad jumped out and scrambled for cover. Just administration. Mitchell grabbed his rifle Someone had to maintain the .50 caliber on Someone had to ensure the system functioned properly. The ditch was 4 feet deep with a foot of stagnant water told himself these things every day. It stank of mud and decomposing vegetation. The narrow bunk in the officer's quarters where he could hear artillery rumbling in the distance. Bullets cracked overhead. The office operated on a rigid opposite bank of the ditch. Morning documents arrived. Mitchell pressed himself against the slope and tried to make himself sorted them by priority and This was nothing like training. High priority items training had targets that stayed in designated areas. Routine administrative materials he controlled when shooting started and stopped. By 1700 hours, this was everything that had arrived that day should be filed, Blake giving copied if necessary, and something about flanking in the master log. Something the about system worked because Hartmann made it work. The words didn't register. His efficiency was appreciated. Mitchell's vision had narrowed to the mud directly in front of his noting that his filing system allowed breathing was shallow and locate any document within minutes. His hands trembled. This ability to quickly retrieve information was considered essential to military effectiveness. The German gun was over 1,000 yards away on October 14th. The morning document delivery included 47 separate items. He could not shoot requests from various units. He could not suppress the enemy. Personnel transfer orders. He could only lie in this ditch and wait for artillery to kill him. Medical reports. Russo crawled beside him. And 2 execution orders from different security divisions operating in the district. Mitchell didn't respond. The first execution order was 15 yards away across such a thing could be called routine. The German machine gun was still firing. 12 civilians accused of providing food to partisan units. Mitchell. The order had already been carried out 3 days earlier. The gun. Hartmann was simply receiving the administrative confirmation for filing. He would place it in cabinet 12, then we stay here until the unit designation that had executed the order. The logic was sound, but Mitchell's body would not cooperate. It had not yet been carried out. His muscles felt locked. It was scheduled for implementation on October 17th, techniques, but it had not taught 3 days away when every instinct screamed to stay motionless. The order concerned a group of 42 people who had been held in temporary detention since September. I'll go. Men, women, children. Ages ranging from 8 years old to 67. October 14th, stop him. 19 vaulted over the ditch lip and sprinted toward the personnel office. Smolensk German fire immediately shifted Soviet territory. Bullets kicked up dirt around his feet. The 3rd floor of what had been a municipal building vehicle and disappeared from view. 3 tall windows faced south, letting in pale autumn light that caught dust particles suspended in air that smelled of fire, ink, and the Chen had reached the gun and was returning fire toward the barely functioned anymore. Mitchell felt shame inside the office hovered somewhere between Chen had done what Mitchell should have barely tolerable. Had moved when 22-year-old Oberstreiter Klaus Hartmann the realization did not make Mitchell move slightly whenever he shifted. It just made him feel worse. His uniform was clean but worn thin at the elbows. Chen's suppression was effective were stained with an extreme range. Carbon paper he used to make German gunners couldn't see their targets while .50 caliber rounds and the endless stream of administrative documents that fed the machinery used the opportunity to organize movement. Hartmann had been assigned to this office for 7 months. That stone wall. He processed second team, covering fire. That was his war. The squad began to function as a unit. From his hometown near Stuttgart men moved in short rushes while others fired. In Kharkov. Klaus Hartmann stamped ground in stages, using terrain features and maintained the meticulous record. Mitchell moved with them because the alternative was staying alone even in the chaos of the Eastern Front. His body obeyed Blake's orders even though his mind remained locked in terror. Methodical. They reached the stone wall. The kind of man who double-checked filing codes to provide cover from every document ended up in its proper folder. Chen brought the half-track forward and positioned it behind the wall. Hauptman Werner Dietrich Mitchell climbed onto the vehicle and took his position behind the gun without being told. The filing system Hartmann maintained was a model of German organizational precision. Check ammunition. The room contained 16 filing cabinets. Acquire target. Metal. The mechanical routine was comforting. Each one labeled with alphanumeric codes and designated different categories of documents. German position is in that grove of trees at 10 o'clock. Supply requisitions. 800 yards, Blake said. Intelligence summaries. Put fire on it when I give the word. Execution orders. Mitchell aimed at the tree category occupied cabinet number 12. He could see shadows that might be men or might be branches. The documents inside detailed the implementation of security operations. But Chen had fired at that range and forced the Germans to take terminology. Maybe that was enough. Operations. Maybe suppression didn't cover many things. Maybe the goal was just to make the enemy hesitate long enough for friendly forces to maneuver. The shooting of hostages. Fire. The liquidation of civilians deemed threats to military security. He filed these documents the same way he filed everything else, by 2 seconds. Alphabetically. The tracers showed his rounds impacting short of the tree line. Designation. He elevated slightly because reading was part of filing. Better. You had to understand what a document contained in order to categorize it exploding. Whether he read about German soldiers or just trees, about civilians executed as punishment for partisan activity. About Jewish populations transferred to collection points, then American infantry flanked the position and the Germans withdrew. He read these things and Mitchell never saw the enemy soldiers clearly. That was his job. They were distant shapes that moved through trees and vanished over a ridge. Someone had to maintain 120 rounds during the engagement. Someone had to ensure the system functioned properly. If any had hit their intended targets. Klaus Hartmann told himself these things every day. But when Blake patted his shoulder and said, "They helped him sleep at night in a narrow bunk in the officer's quarters where he could hear artillery rumbling in the distance like permanent thunder." Not confidence. The office operated just on a slight loosening of the paralysis that morning documents arrived at 0800. He had fired the weapon when ordered. Hartmann sorted them by priority. He had performed his function within the squad. High priority items. It was the minimum requirement, but it felt like more after those minutes of administrative materials he processed himself. The squad remounted by 1700 continued inland. Everything that had arrived that day morning had become hot, copied if necessary, dust-coated Mitchell's documented in the master log. His canteen was already half because Hartmann made it work. The landscape passed in a blur of farmhouses and fields. He had received a commendation noting that his filing system allowed senior Italian soldiers in bunkers who surrendered after token opposition. This ability to quickly retrieve information was considered essential to military effectiveness. Nothing like the sustained combat at the beach. The morning document delivery they had advanced 5 miles and reached the outskirts of a town called Ponte Olivo from various units. The town was small, personnel transfer maybe 200 buildings clustered around intelligence summaries. Intelligence reports indicated it was undefended, and 2 execution orders from different security divisions without opposition in the district. Mitchell's first execution order was routine, rolling through narrow streets, if such a thing could be called routine. They had reached the town square when the German civilians accused of providing food to partisan units. The order had already been carried out 3 days earlier. Hartmann was simply receiving the administrative confirmation for filing. He would place it in Cabinet 12, bottom drawer, under the unit designation that had executed the order. The second execution order was different. It had not yet been carried out. It was scheduled for implementation on October 17. 3 days away. The order concerned a group of 42 people who had been held in temporary detention since September. Men, women, children. Ages ranging from 8 years old to 67. The tank was a Panzer IV, painted in sand and brown camouflage. Wehrmacht personnel office. It emerged from behind the church at the far end of the square. Soviet territory. 75mm gun. The filing room occupied the third floor of what had been a municipal building before the German invasion. 3 tall windows faced south, letting in pale autumn instructions about target identification in air that smelled of paper. None of it mattered. And the faint residue of coal smoke from the heating system that barely functioned and had already fired. The temperature inside the office hovered somewhere punching through a second-story window of the building behind Mitchell's half-track. 22-year-old explosion sent masonry cascading into the desk that wobbled slightly whenever he shifted the half-track into reverse. His uniform was clean but worn thin at the elbows. Mitchell gripped the gun mount to avoid being thrown from the paper he used to make copies of orders, tank requisitions, Blake shouted reports, and the Mitchell's training responded automatically fed the machinery of occupation. He swung the .50 caliber. Hartmann had been assigned to this office for 7 months. Rounds sparked off the tank's frontal armor in bright flashes. That was his war. The armor was too thick. While other young men from his hometown near Stuttgart might as well have died at places like Kursk and Kharkov, but Mitchell kept firing because stopping meant acknowledging he was helpless against this threat, and maintained the meticulous record-keeping fired again. German military administration. This time the shell struck the half-track directly behind Mitchell's vehicle. He was good at this work. The explosion was massive, methodical. Heat washed over Mitchell's back. The kind of man who double-checked filing codes and made certain every document ended up mounted proper continued firing. His superior ammunition belt fed smoothly through the receiver had commended him 3 times for his efficiency. Ejected in a stream. The filing system Hartmann began to glow. Was a model of German organization. Was shouting something but Mitchell couldn't hear. The room contained 16 his world filing had narrowed cabinets to the front sight and the tank and the trigger under his finger. Gray. Fire. Each one labeled with alphanumeric codes that designated different categories of documents. The tank wasn't moving. Personnel transfers. Maybe he was doing damage. Supply requisitions. Maybe his rounds were hitting vision intelligence or damaging external equipment. Execution orders. Maybe. That the last category occupied cabinet Mitchell number 12. Pulled the trigger and nothing happened. Bottom drawer. The bolt was documents inside back. Detailed the implementation he could of see a brass casing caught at an angle in the ejection port. That was the official terminology. A double feed. Security operations. The training had covered this. The phrase covered many things. The procedure. Partisan but his hands wouldn't stop shaking long enough to execute it. The shooting of hostages. Russo yelled. The liquidation of civilians. He tried to help, but there wasn't military security behind the gun. Hartmann filed Mitchell these documents the same way he filed everything else. His fingers couldn't get purchase on the jammed cartridge. By date, the tank fired again. By unit designation, the round passed so close that Mitchell felt the air display filing. It struck a wall 20 what a document contained in order to categorize stone fragments peppered his face. So he read about villages burned. He abandoned the machine gun and grabbed his civilians rifle. Executed as punishment the M1 for partisan activity. Felt small and inadequate compared about Jewish populations transferred to collection points and then disappearing from the administrative record. He aimed at the tank and fired. He read these things and then pinged off armor. That was his job. He fired again. Just paperwork. And again. Just administration. The rifle had to maintain the ejected with its distinctive ping. Someone had to ensure the system functioned for a fresh clip from his belt. Klaus Hartmann told himself turning things every day. The 75mm gun was traversing directly toward Mitchell's half-track. He could hear artillery rumbling in the distance. In perhaps 3 seconds it would fire and Mitchell would cease to exist. The office operated on a rigid schedule. He dropped the rifle. Morning documents arrived at 0800. He was not conscious. His hands simply released the weapon and it clattered onto the deck. High-priority items. Mitchell stood frozen behind the jammed machine gun watching the tank's gun barrel track toward him with the certainty that this was how he would die. By 1700 not heroically covering that had arrived that day should be filed, not achieving some tactical objective, and properly documented just in the master log. Stupidly behind broken equipment. The system worked because Hartmann methodically destroyed his vehicle. His efficiency was appreciated. Sergeant Blake hit him from the side. He had received a commendation noting that his filing system allowed senior officers to locate any document within minutes. Blake's weight on top of ability to quickly retrieve information was considered essential to military effectiveness. The shell struck where Mitchell had been standing. The morning document delivery the machine gun mounted separate items. The vehicle's supply requests from various units. Flames engulfed personnel transfer orders. Blake dragged Mitchell toward a doorway. Medical cover as ammunition began and cooking off in the burning orders from different security divisions. Rounds fired randomly as heat triggered the primers. The first execution order was routine. Tracers arced in every direction. If such a thing could be called routine. One struck the church wall above Mitchell's head. The shooting of 12 civilians stone dust fell into providing food to partisan units. Stay down. Blake the order said. Had already been carried out 3 days earlier, moving to another position. Hartmann was simply receiving the administrative confirmation for filing. Mitchell stayed down. He would place it in cabinet 12. He pressed himself against the doorframe under the unit designation that had executed the order. Each inhalation was difficult. The second execution order was his chest hurt where Blake had tackled. It had not yet been carried out. His hands were still shaking. It was scheduled for implementation. His rifle was somewhere 17th. On the burning half-track. 3 days away. The machine gun he had been responsible for was destroyed. 42 people who had been held in failed every basic requirement of his job. Men, the women, sounds of combat children. Continued. Ages ranging small from 8 years old to 67, shouting. An explosion that might have been a bazooka. Mitchell heard it all from inside the doorway but did not look. He stared at his trembling hands and tried to understand what had happened to him. The training had not prepared him for this paralysis. The manual had not included a chapter on what to do when fear made thinking impossible. How long he remained in the doorway, he didn't know. Minutes. Maybe longer. Eventually the firing decreased. Voices called out. American voices. Someone said the tank had been disabled. Someone else said they were pulling back to regroup. Mitchell didn't move until Russo appeared and physically pulled him to his feet. We're leaving. Can you walk? Mitchell nodded. His legs worked. His body could still perform basic functions even if his mind had gone somewhere else. They moved through back alleys away from the square. The squad had been reduced. Mitchell counted 6 men including himself. The others were dead or wounded or separated. The half-track was gone. The .50 caliber was gone. Mitchell's rifle was gone. He had nothing but the uniform he wore and a growing certainty that he was not suited for this role. They reached an olive grove outside the town and took cover among the trees. An American tank destroyer had knocked out the Panzer. Infantry was clearing the remaining buildings. The situation was stabilizing. Mitchell sat with his back against a tree trunk and tried to stop shaking. Blake appeared and crouched beside him. His face was streaked with smoke and blood from a cut above his eye. "You injured?" "No, Sergeant." Blake studied him for a long moment. "What happened back there?" Mitchell didn't answer. What could he say? That he had panicked? That he had frozen? That all the training had evaporated the moment real fear had arrived? "The gun jammed," Mitchell finally said. "I saw that. I also saw you drop your rifle." Silence stretched between them. Blake was not accusing him. Not yet. Just stating facts. Giving Mitchell an opportunity to explain. But Mitchell had no explanation that would make sense. "You can't do that again," Blake said quietly. "When the gun jams, you clear it. When one weapon fails, you use another. You keep fighting until you're dead or the enemy is gone. That's the job." "Yes, Sergeant. I need to know you can do the job." 1943. Every man in this squad depends on that gun. Smolensk district. If you can't handle occupied Soviet territory. Mitchell looked at Blake's face. Occupied the third floor of what had been a municipal building before the German invasion. The stress. 3 tall windows faced south, letting in pale autumn light that caught dust particles suspended in air that smelled of paper, ink, he was as unprepared for this as Mitchell from the heating system, but Blake was functioning despite the fear. The temperature inside the office hovered somewhere between uncomfortably cold and just barely tolerable. The words came from some automatic. Klaus Hartmann sat at a metal desk that had been trained to give the correct answers to superior officers. His uniform was clean but worn thin at the elbows. His fingers were stained with ink from the primitive carbon paper he used to make copies of orders, requisitions. He stood and moved away to check on the other men. Endless stream of administrative documents that fed the machinery of occupation. His hands had stopped shaking. Hartmann had been assigned to this office for 7 months. A tremor deeper inside his chest. Paperwork. Not panic exactly. While like a fundamental questioning of everything he had believed about himself, at places like Kursk and Kharkov, he had thought the training made him ready. Stamped documents. He had thought courage was something you could choose and maintain the meticulous record-keeping. He was beginning to understand that courage and readiness were not even in the chaos of the Eastern Front. You could be trained and still break. He was good at this work. You could follow orders and still fail. Organized. The afternoon passed slowly. The kind of man who double-checked filing codes and made certain every document ended up in another platoon whose half-track had been destroyed. His superior officer, they were given a fresh M3 had commended him 3 times for his efficiency. A new .50 caliber was mounted on the rear maintained was a model of German organizations were loaded. The Mitchell went through the motions of checking the weapon and setting headspace and charging the bolt. Gray. His hands knew these actions labeled so with alphanumeric codes that designated different categories of documents. A voice kept repeating the personnel transfers. What happens next time? Supply requisitions. That night they camped in the intelligence summaries. No fires. Execution orders. Men ate that last category spoken with cabinet number 12. Mitchell lay on his back looking at stars through the trees. The documents inside detailed the implementation of security operations. The front had moved inland. That was the official terminology. Seemed like it had happened weeks ago. Security operations. 15 hours. The phrase covered many became strange. Partisan compressed and distorted. Reprisal actions sat beside him. The shooting of hostages. You did okay today. The liquidation of civilians deemed threats to military security. I dropped my rifle. Hartmann filed these documents the same way he filed everything else. Russo paused. Alphabetically. But you got back on the gun after it jammed. By unit designation. You kept firing at the tank even though you knew because reading was part of filing. That counts for something. You had to understand what a document contained in order to categorize it properly. You're alive. So he read about matters burned. Mitchell wanted civilians executed as punishment for partisan survival was sufficient justification for his populations transferred to collection points and then disappeared. The real administrative record. Could he do the job when it mattered? He read these things and then filed an answer. That was his job. 11th. Just the advance continued inland. Just administration. Mitchell's squad was attached to a company pushing toward the town of Caltagirone. Someone had to ensure the terrain became more difficult. Klaus Hartmann told himself these things every day. Stone walls and terraced fields. They helped him sleep at night in the narrow bunk in the officers' quarters could establish artillery rumbling and delay American moon and thunder. At 1400 they encountered a German machine gun nest covering a bridge over a narrow river. 0800. The position was well placed. Hartmann sorted them by priority. Any vehicle attempting to cross would be exposed for 10 seconds in the open. Dietrich immediately. Multiple attempts had been made by other materials he processed himself. Each had resulted in casualties. By 1700 hours, Blake assembled the squad. That had arrived that day should be filed. You're going to provide covering fire properly documented in the master log. I need you to keep that because Hartmann made it for 2 minutes. His efficiency was appreciated. Mitchell looked at the bridge. He had received a commendation noting that his position was 600 yards away on to locate any document within minutes. Good range for the .50 this ability caliber. To quickly retrieve information. The German gunners would see his muzzle flashes and return fire, but the half-track's armor might protect the morning document delivery included 47 it was a straightforward fire mission. Supply requests from the training had covered extensively. Personnel transfer orders. Sergeant. Intelligence summaries. Fire medical reports. 3-round 2 execution orders from different security divisions operating in the positioned. The first execution order was routine. Your job is to make them keep their heads down while our infantry moves. It concerned the shooting of 12 civilians onto the half-track and positioned himself behind the gun. The order had already been carried out 3 days earlier. The driver started the engine was simply receiving the administrative confirmation for quickly if needed. He would place it in cabinet at the tree line on the far bank. Under the unit designation he could see a concrete bunker partially hidden by foliage. The second execution order was different. That was probably the machine gun position. It had not yet been carried out. Fire. It was scheduled for implementation on October 17. 3 rounds. 3 days away. Pause. The order concerned a group of 42 people who had been held in temporary detention since September. Disciplined. Men, control, women, children. His breathing was steady. Ages ranging from 8 years old to 67 among the trees. He could see branches breaking. Dust rising. He shifted his aim left and fired again. Then right. Creating a pattern of suppression across the likely enemy positions. The German gun returned fire. Rounds cracked overhead. One struck the half-track's armor with a loud clang. Mitchell flinched but kept firing. His hands were steady on the weapon. His mind was focused on the task. This was what training was for. Clear objective. Defined duration. Just 2 minutes. He could see American infantry moving through a gully parallel to the river. They were covered from German view by the terrain. Blake's plan was working. The Germans were concentrating on Mitchell's gun and not scanning for flanking movement. Mitchell kept firing. 3-round bursts. Measured pauses. Traverse left. Traverse right. The barrel began to heat. Not critical yet. He had plenty of rounds left before needing to change. 1 minute, Blake called. Mitchell continued the pattern. 1943. His shoulder ached from the weapons personnel office. His ears rang despite occupied Soviet territory. Brass casings piled around occupied the 3rd floor of what had been a municipal building before the German invasion. Either they were running low on ammunition or they were repositioning, letting in pale autumn light that caught dust particles suspended in air that smelled of paper, ink, 30 seconds, and a faint residue of coal smoke from the heating system that barely functioned anymore. Mitchell could see the infantry emerging from the temperature inside the office hovered somewhere between uncomfortably cold and just barely tolerable. He just needed to maintain fire. Klaus Hartmann sat at a metal desk that wobbled slightly whenever he shifted his weight. Pause. His uniform was clean but worn thin at the elbows. Pause. His German machine gun fired one final long burst. He used to make copies of orders, requisitions. The infantry had reached the position, and the endless stream of small armed fires that fed the machinery of occupation. The bridge had been assigned to this office for 7 months. Blake ordered. He processed paperwork. Mitchell lifted his finger from the trigger. That was his war. The barrel was while other young men from his hometown near Stuttgart rose from the receiver. Places like Kursk and the ammunition belt had 200 rounds remaining. Filed correspondence. He had fired approximately 300 rounds in 2 systems that German military administration demanded even in the chaos of the Eastern Front. The weapon had functioned perfectly. He was good at this work. He had functioned methodically. Blake was looking at him with something like relief. The kind of man who double-checked filing codes and made certain every document ended up in its proper folder. He didn't feel proud. His superior accomplished. Hauptmann Werner Dietrich had commended him 3 times. The mission had been completed, but it had required everything. The filing system Hartmann maintained was a model of German organizational and mechanical routine. The room contained 16 filing thought or fear or anything beyond the immediate task. Gray. And it had only lasted labeled with alphanumeric codes that designated different categories of documents. What would personnel happen when routine wasn't enough? Supply requisitions. The company crossed the bridge and continued intelligence summaries. Mitchell remained at his gun, scanning for threats. That last category occupied cabinet number 12. The afternoon passed without further contact. The documents inside detailed the implementation of security defensive positions on the town's perimeter. That was the official terminology. Mitchell helped prepare the half-track for night operations. The phrase covered many things: redistributed partisan sweeps, confirmed communication procedures with the driver and Blake, the shooting of hostages. Russo brought food, the liquidation of civilians, cold beans from a can, military security, stale bread. Hartmann filed these documents the same way he filed everything else. His body needed fuel. Alphabetically. That was the only thing that mattered. By unit designation. You did good today, Russo said. He read them because reading was part of reassurance. You had to understand what a document contained in order to categorize it properly. I did what I was ordered to do. So he read about villages burned. That's the job. About civilians executed as punishment for partisan activity. Keep the gun working. About Jewish populations transferred to collection points, and when the orders require me to do something administrative record. Russo didn't have an answer for that, and then filed them. Neither did Mitchell. That was his job. That night he just first watch, sitting behind the .50 caliber while the rest of the squad had to maintain the records. The town was quiet. Someone had to ensure the system functioned properly. Occasionally he heard distant vehicles or voice things every day. No signs of German activity. They helped him sleep at night in the narrow bunk in the officers' quarters where he could hear artillery rumbling in the distance like permanent thunder. Mitchell thought about the bridge. The office operated on a rigid schedule. Bursts. Morning documents arrived Blake's instructions and achieving the objective. Hartmann sorted them by priority and type. He had done his job correctly. Items went to Hauptmann Dietrich, but he also remembered the town square. Routine administrative materials. Dropping his rifle when the tank had turned its gun toward him. By 1700 hours, remember Blake having arrived that day should be from danger. Copied if necessary. Two different versions documented in the master log. One that could function. The system worked because Hartmann made it work. One that failed when those conditions was appreciated. He didn't know which was the real version, noting that his filing system allowed which one would show up the next time any document within minutes. The stars moved slowly across the sky. Retrieve information was considered essential to military effectiveness. On October 14th, Mitchell crawled into the half-document delivery included 47 separate items. But sleep wouldn't come. Supply requests from various units listening to the breathing of the personnel transfer about tomorrow. Intelligence about the next engagement. Medical about reports. The moment when fear would return and two execution orders from different security divisions. The training had taught him how to operate a machine gun. The first execution order was routine. It had not taught him how to operate himself. If such a thing could be called routine. It concerned the shooting of 12 civilians accused of providing food to partisan units. The order had already been carried out 3 days earlier. Hartmann was simply receiving the administrative confirmation for filing. He would place it in Cabinet 12, bottom drawer, under the unit designation that had executed the order. The second execution order was different. It had not yet been carried out. It was scheduled for implementation on October 17th. 3 days away. The order concerned a group of 42 people who had been held in temporary detention since September. Men, women, children. Ages ranging from 8 years old to 67. July 14, 1943. 8 days after the initial landing, Smolensk district, the 2nd Armored Division had pushed 60 miles inland. The filing room occupied German resistance had stiffened. What had been a municipal building what had been a rapid advance had become a grinding fight for each town and road junction, letting in pale autumn light squad had been in continuous contact with enemy forces for 4 days, and the faint residue of coal smoke from the heating system that barely functioned anymore. Blake had been promoted to lieutenant and transferred to another somewhere between uncomfortably cold and just barely Webb had taken command of the squad. 22-year-old Obertfreier was different from Blake. Sat at a metal desk that wobbled slightly whenever he shifted his weight. He had fought in North Africa and knew how combat actually worked rather than how the training manuals were stained with ink from the primitive carbon paper. His first conversation with Mitchell had been brief and direct. Casualty reports. I read Blake's after-action reports, administrative documents that fed the machinery of occupation. He wrote that you had some problems under fire. Hartmann had been assigned to this office for 7 months. Had prepared his paperwork. The gun was his war, Sergeant. While other young men from his hometown near Stuttgart fought and died at places like dropped your rifle when a Panzer engaged your position. Stamped documents, filed point in denying it, and maintained the meticulous record-keeping systems that German military administration demanded even in the chaos of the Eastern Front. The question was so direct that Mitchell didn't have time to construct a safe answer. Organized. Yes, the kind of man who double-checked filing codes and made certain every document ended up in its proper folder. The men who aren't scared are either stupid or lying. Werner Dietrich, Webb commended him 3 times for his efficiency. Being scared is normal. The filing system stop you from functioning is a model of German organizational precision. You understand the difference. The room contains 16 filing cabinets. Here's what I'm going to teach you. Gray, most important thing I learned labeled with alphanumeric codes that designated different categories of documents. When you're personnel transfers, stop trying to think. Supply requisitions. Just do the next immediate intelligence summaries. Not the whole mission. Execution orders. Not the big objective. That last category occupied just the next single thing in front of you. Bottom gun jammed. The documents inside detailed the implementation of security operations. Don't think about the enemy or the danger or official terminology. Just security operations. Can you do that? The phrase covered many things. Sergeant. Partisan sweeps. Then after you clear the gun, reprisal action. The shooting of hostages. Just the liquidation of civilians. Then another action, military security. Aim at target. Hartmann filed these documents the same way he filed everything else. Weapon. Each action is simple by itself. By date. String enough simple actions together and suddenly you read them because reading was part of filing. But you never think about the mission. You had to understand what a document contained in order to categorize it properly. It made sense in a way the training never had. The training had emphasized objectives and punishment for partisan activity. About Jewish population that required a mind capable of analysis and then disappearing from the administrative Webb was offering something smaller and more achievable and then filed them. Immediate actions that was his require thought. Just paperwork. Just execution. Just administration. I'll try that, Sergeant. Someone had to maintain the records. Someone had to ensure the system functioned properly. A German position and I knew that Hartmann told himself these things every day. The mission briefing came at 1600. They helped him sleep at night in the narrow bunk in the identified a German strong point blocking the road in the distance like permanent thunder. The position consisted of the three machine-gun bunkers supported by mortars and at least one documents arrived at 0800. American artillery would bombard the position by priority starting at 2200. High priority items infantry would assault at 2230 under cover of administrative materials he processed Mitchell's squad would provide mobile by fire support from the left flank. Everything that had arrived Webb gathered the squad and reviewed the plan necessary, and properly documented. Your job is to suppress the left bunker when the system works because Hartmann made it work. The artillery will soften them up but won't knock out concrete bunkers. He had received a commendation noting that his filing system allowed senior officers to locate any document within minutes. Understood. This ability to quickly retrieve information was considered essential to military effectiveness. Not the infantry. On October 14th, the overall mission, the morning document delivery just keep that 47 separate items. Can you do that? Supply requests from various units. Sergeant. Personnel transfer before the assault passed slowly. Intelligence summary. Mitchell checked his equipment. Medical reports. Cleaned the machine gun even though it was already different security divisions operating in ammunition boxes. The first execution order was procedures with the driver. If such a thing could be called simple actions that kept his hands busy and his mind occupied. 12 civilians accused of providing food to partisan the artillery began. The order had already been carried out the night sky 3 miles distant. Hartmann was simply receiving the administrative confirmation of his filing. For 30 minutes the bombardment continued. Bottom drawer, under the unit designation that had executed the order. Mount up, Webb order. The second execution order was climbed onto the half-track and positioned himself behind a gun. It was scheduled for implementation on October 17th. They rolled through darkness with headlights 3 days away, following a dirt road. The order concerned the group of 42 people who had been held in temporary detention was gone, destroyed by watching the artillery flashes. Children. He could barely see the gun from 8 years old to 67. The half-track stopped. They were 400 yards from the German position. Too far for the enemy to see them but close enough for Mitchell to engage once the attack started. The infantry was approaching from another direction. Mitchell would know when to fire by watching for muzzle flashes when the Germans opened up on the assault force. He waited. The darkness was complete. No moon. Clouds obscured the stars. He could hear his own breathing. Feel his heartbeat. His hands rested on the gun grips, ready but not tense. Just waiting for the moment when action would be required. The German machine guns opened fire. Tracers lit up the night in red streams. Mitchell could see exactly where the left bunker was positioned. He aimed and fired. 3-round burst. Simple action. Just squeeze trigger and release. Don't think about Germans or danger. Just fire the weapon. Pause. Simple action. Release trigger for 2 seconds. 3-round burst. Simple action. Squeeze and release. The pattern was mechanical. Thoughtless. His mind wasn't engaged in tactics or fear or anything beyond the immediate sequence of actions. Fire. Pause. Fire. Pause. Traverse slightly left. Fire. Pause. Traverse slightly right. Fire. Pause. The German bunker's fire decreased. Mitchell had their attention. They were suppressing him instead of the infantry. He kept firing. The barrel heated. That was fine. He had spare barrels if needed. But he didn't think about changing barrels. That wasn't the current action. Current action was fire. Pause. Fire. Pause. Russo tapped his shoulder. Mitchell stopped firing. Russo pointed toward the bunker. The infantry had reached it. Satchel charges were being placed. 10 seconds later an explosion blew out one side of the bunker. The German gun went silent. "Cease fire," Webb's voice came over the radio. Mitchell lifted his finger from the trigger. Mission complete. He hadn't thought about the mission. Hadn't worried about the infantry or the Germans or what might go wrong. He had just performed a series of simple actions and the actions had added up to success. Webb appeared beside the half-track. "Good shooting. How many rounds did you fire?" Mitchell checked the ammunition box. "Approximately 250, Sergeant." "Controlled bursts the whole time?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Outstanding. That's exactly what I needed." Webb paused. "How are you feeling?" The question surprised Mitchell. "Fine, Sergeant." "Not scared?" Mitchell considered. "I don't know. I wasn't thinking about being scared. I was just thinking about the next burst." Webb smiled. "That's the secret. When you're too scared to think big, think small. Think about the next action. Just the next one. Nothing else." The insight settled into Mitchell's mind like something he had always known but never Personnel Office, Smolensk District, came from thinking about Soviet territory. About death and injury and occupied the third floor of what had been a municipal building before the German invasion. But actions didn't require thinking about outcomes. South, letting in pale autumn light just required dust particles suspended in air that smelled of paper, ink, then the faint residue of coal smoke from the heating system that interfered with that process because fear required thought and inside the office hovered somewhere between uncomfortable. The revelation was so simple that Mitchell almost laughed. 22-year-old all those weeks of training sat at a metal desk. All those lectures about courage and discipline and mental toughness. His uniform was clean but worn thin just to stop thinking entirely. His fingers were stained with ink from the primitive carbon paper he used to make copies to a series of immediate actions that didn't require emotional engagement. And the endless stream of administrative documents that fed the machinery of occupation. "Don't thank me." Hartmann had been assigned to this office for 7 months. The campaign continued. He processed paperwork. Mitchell's squad participated in 12 more combat engagements while other young men from his hometown near Stuttgart fought and died at places like Kursk and Kharkov. Klaus Hartmann started to overwhelm him. Filed correspondence, trying to fight and maintain the meticulous record on the next immediate action. German military administration demanded even in the chaos of the Eastern Front. He was good at this work. Clear jam. Methodical. Change barrel. Organized. Each action the kind of man who double-checked and disconnected from the larger terrifying every document ended up in its proper folder. It didn't eliminate the fear. His superior officer, Mitchell, was still scared during every engagement, had commended him 3 times but for his efficiency. But the fear no longer paralyzed him because he wasn't trying to think through. Maintained was a model of German organizational precision. He was just doing the next small thing. The room contained 16 filing cabinets. Then the next. Metal. Fear couldn't stop that process. Each one labeled with alphanumeric codes that designated different categories withdrawn for rest and refit. Personnel had become one of the most reliable machine gunners in his requisitions. Not because he had overcome his fear. Execution not because he had become braver. That last category but because he had learned to function despite the fear by breaking combat down into manageable pieces. The documents inside the lesson the implementation of security operations. Italy. That was the official terminology. Germany. Security operations. Mitchell participated in 27 major engagements and countless smaller partisan sweeps. He was wounded twice. Actions. He received the Silver Star for actions during the Battle of the liquidation of civilians suppressive fire to military positions for 6 hours straight. Hartmann filed these documents the same way he filed everything else. But the decoration that mattered most to him was a conversation he had with Webb in October 1944 by unit designation after they had survived a brutal engagement. He read them because reading was part of filing. You remember you had to understand what a document contained in order to categorize it properly. When I told you to just focus on the next action. About civilians executed as punishment for partisan activity. That night too. About terrified populations transferred to collection points, but I couldn't let you know that because you need administrative record. He read these things and then filed because it's what I was doing. That was his job. Breaking everything down into small pieces so I didn't have to think about how scared I was. Someone had to maintain the record with new understanding. Someone had to ensure the system as much as teaching me. Klaus Hartmann told himself these things every day. We're all scared. They helped every single one of us. The narrow bunk in the officers' quarters. The ones who survived are just the ones who learned to function like permanent thunder. And the way you function is you stop trying to think and you just do the next immediate Morning documents arrived at 0800. That conversation stayed with Mitchell long after the war ended them by priority and type. He returned to Oregon in 1946 and worked in his father's timber operation until his father retired. Administrative materials he processed himself. Then Mitchell took over the business and ran it for another 30 years. Everything that had arrived that day the principles that kept him alive in combat served him equally well in civilian master log. When problems seemed overwhelming, Hartmann made them into immediate actions. His efficiency was appreciated. When fear of failure threatened to paralyze, he had received a commendation noting that his filing system allowed senior officers to locate any document within minutes. Think about the next step. This ability to quickly retrieve information was considered essential to military effectiveness. Lived a quiet life that bore no resemblance to document delivery included 47 but occasionally something would trigger a memory. Supply requests from various units. The sound of fireworks. Personnel transfer orders. The smell of diesel fuel. Intelligent particular quality of light just before medical dawn. Reports. And he would remember standing behind orders from different security divisions operating in the district, learning the lesson that the first execution order was routine. In 1992, such a thing Mitchell's grandson interviewed him for a high school history project. It concerned the shooting of 12 civilians accused of providing the grandson asked what Mitchell had learned from combat. The order had already been carried out 3 days for a long moment before answering. Hartmann was simply receiving the administrative confirmation for filing, he said. He would place the ability to function despite bottom drawer, under the unit designation as you stop trying to be brave and you just do the next thing. Execution order was different. That's all. It had not yet been carried out. The grandson asked if Mitchell considered himself a 17th. Mitchell 3 days away. I was just concerned with a machine gun who learned not to think in temporary detention since there were thousands of us. Men, women, most didn't make it home. Ages ranging from 8 years old to 67 focus on immediate actions instead of trying to process everything at once. That's not heroism. That's just a technique for staying functional when you're too scared to think clearly. October 14th saved his 1943. More importantly, Wehrmacht it had saved him from becoming paralyzed by his own fear. Occupied Soviet territory. And in the decades after the war, the filing room occupied the third floor of what had been a municipal building before the German invasion. Health problems. 3 tall windows faced south. He applied the same pale autumn light that caught dust particles suspended in air that smelled of paper. Break it into immediate action. A faint residue of coal smoke from the heating system that barely functioned anymore. Focus on the next small thing. The temperature inside the office hovered somewhere between on a Sicilian night and just barely tolerable. Became the foundation of everything that followed. Hartmann Harold Mitchell died in 2001 at the age of 79. His weight. His funeral was attended by family and friends who remembered him as a successful businessman. His fingers were stained with ink from the primitive carbon paper rarely used to make copies of orders, requisitions, but in the obituary his children wrote, and the endless stream of administrative documents about his military machinery of occupation. Our father served in the 2nd Armored Division during World War II and participated in the campaigns in Sicily, Italy, France, and Germany. While other young men discussed his combat experiences, but he did share one lesson he learned. When you're too scared to think, just do the next immediate action. Correspondence, and that advice guided him through war and through life. German military administration. We miss him and honor his memory. The chaos of the Eastern Front. The machine gun Mitchell operated is gone, destroyed or scrapped long ago. The half-track is gone. The kind of man who double-checked filing learned to function despite every document ended up in its proper folder. The physical evidence of his service has vanished. Werner Dietrich but the lesson 3 times for his efficiency. Passed from Sergeant Webb to Private Mitchell to Mitchell's children was a model of German organizational precision. Passed from one scared person to another across the decades. Filing cabinets. Not a lesson about heroism or courage or military valor. Each one labeled with just a technique for remaining designated different categories of possible. Personnel on the next immediate action. Supply requisition. Not the mission. Intelligence summaries. Just the next small thing you can control. That last category occupied cabinet number 12. Then do the next thing. Bottom drawer. String enough immediate actions together and suddenly details the implementation of security operations. That's what was the official terminology. Panicked and stopped firing. Security operations. Staying alive didn't require the phrase covered many things. It only required being functional. And functionality came from thinking small, the shooting of hostages, and not trying to process the larger terrifying realities to military security. The lesson that saved him in these documents saved him in Belgium and Germany and France. Then it saved him in business and marriage and parenthood and every other challenge he faced in the 55 years after the war ended. Because reading was part of filing. He was just one man among millions. You had to understand what a document contained in order to categorize it properly. Not so he read about villages burned, not particularly brave, about civilians executed as someone who learned how to keep functioning when everything in him wanted to freeze, about Jewish populations transferred to collection points enough and then disappearing from the administrative record. Sometimes learning to do the next immediate thing. He read these things between breaking and bending. That was his job. Paralysis and action. Just paperwork. Between who you are when you're too scared to think and who you become when you stop trying to think and just do. Someone had to ensure the system functioned properly. Klaus Hartmann told himself these things every day. Persistent. They helped him sleep at night in the narrow bunk in the officers' quarters where he could hear artillery rumbling in the distance like permanent thunder. And somehow, the office operated on a rigid schedule. Morning documents arrived at 0800. Hartmann sorted them by priority and type. High-priority items went to Hauptmann Dietrich immediately. Routine administrative materials he processed himself. By 1700 hours, everything that had arrived that day should be filed, copied if necessary, and properly documented in the master log. The system worked because Hartmann made it work. His efficiency was appreciated. He had received a commendation noting that his filing system allowed senior officers to locate any document within minutes. This ability to quickly retrieve information was considered essential to military effectiveness. On October 14, the morning document delivery included 47 separate items. Supply requests from various units. Personnel transfer orders. Intelligence summaries. Medical reports. And 2 execution orders from different security divisions operating in the district. The first execution order was routine. If such a thing could be called routine. It concerned the shooting of 12 civilians accused of providing food to partisan units. The order had already been carried out 3 days earlier. Hartmann was simply receiving the administrative confirmation for filing. He would place it in Cabinet 12, bottom drawer, under the unit designation that had executed the order. The second execution order was different. It had not yet been carried out. It was scheduled for implementation on October 17. 3 days away. The order concerned a group of 42 people who had been held in temporary detention since September. Men, women, children. Ages ranging from 8 years old to 67.